And I'm Gray. Thank you for joining the Station Between Stations, where we explore all the best of horror rabbit holes, and we have an amazing Christmas episode for you guys.
It really is amazing. We're going to talk about all the scary things that come with Christmas. Christmas horror movies, Christmas demons, all that ho-ho horrible stuff.
And listeners, I want you all to know that just that joke alone has landed Hatter on the naughty list.
Joke's on you, I was already there.
I ain't getting nothing for Christmas, 'cause I ain't been nothing but bad. I feel this was your theme song growing up.
Definitely. The funny thing about the Getting Nothing for Christmas song is that my brother, when I was a kid, told me that he had invented that song. I had never heard it before, but he said he had made it up. And then while we were actually writing the podcast, Gray started singing it, and I was like, oh dear.
And that's why not only is Hatter on the naughty list, his brother's on the naughty list, and I'm starting to wonder about his whole family.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, at least 90% of us. I did things. I just did things. It didn't matter if they were good or bad. It's coincidental that they mostly got me on the naughty list, but I just did things. I'm an agent of chaos and always have been.
Is chaotic neutral a Santa list? If not, it needs to be.
I think you're right. I think we need to have a talk with the big man and get him to add a chaotic neutral list.
We'll put in a petition.
Yeah, you get your chaotic neutral friends. You get them, slingshots, plastic explosives, perfectly innocent stuff.
Actually, one of the last Christmases, I did actually get a slingshot from my father-in-law, specifically to use on my zombie channel to see if it could propel a lead fishing weight fast enough to destroy a coconut. The answer is it could.
Nice. This year for Christmas, for my uncle, I got a new bow and a pistol crossbow, so similar idea.
And I know you were telling me that you learned some very important lessons with that pistol crossbow, which is to make sure your field tips are sharp if you're going to be doing stump archery, which is shooting at dead trees, because from what you were telling me, some of them bounced off and you had to flee for your life.
To do a quick dodge, most of the momentum, of course, was lost in the tree, and it coming back, it was the dull end coming back at me, but I still didn't want to get hit by that. You know those old door stops you'd find on the in old houses that were kind of spring-loaded?
Yeah.
That's the exact sound it made coming back.
That's awesome.
It definitely was. So, what do we have on the agenda today?
So, we're going to be talking about everything Christmas horror, and I don't feel like most people appreciate how much horror is inherent in Christmas. Because, of course, we have the kind of the older original folkloric horror. We've got things like the Krampus, the scary Welsh horse skull on a stick. Yes, that's a thing, and we will explain what that's all about. And we've got media like Nightmare Before Christmas. One of the original slasher movies, if not the original slasher movie, was Black Christmas, which was a Christmas movie. And even if you want to count Psycho as the original slasher movie, and which would technically mean that Black Christmas isn't the original slasher movie, that still means that Christmas got a slasher movie before Halloween did. So we're going to be covering all these different levels of horror and Christmas and where it intersects in media and folklore.
I think Psycho was psychological horror. I wouldn't call it a slasher.
I agree. I think there is a difference, and we'll go into this a little bit more when we get to that, but I feel like there's a difference between slasher horror and psychological thriller / serial killer horror, and I feel that Psycho had a whole lot more in common with something like Silence of the Lambs than it did with something like Freddy versus Jason. It just seems like it's more in that direction.
I agree 100%. But yeah, like you said, that's for another episode. But speaking of Christmas, tell me something. What's the difference between a snowman and a snow woman?
What is the difference between a snowman and a snow woman?
The placement of the snowballs.
Bump. Ching! And that's also why he's going on the naughty list.
I was already there. I'm indestructible, man. I was already there.
That's true. There is a little bit of the I am already on the naughty list. What are you going to do to me? I am a jumble of curses.
He could send the Krampus, which we will get to him in just a moment.
Very soon, actually. The Krampus is kind of the original Christmas horror.
Well, as Gray mentioned, we're going to get to the Krampus very soon, and I want to talk a little bit about some evil Santas, or Christmas demons and monsters that parents made up to keep their kids behaving. Tell you something, folks. Parents today don't know how to rein their kids in. When your parents tell you that a horned demon is going to come into your house in the middle of the night if you're bad and drown you in ink or hit you with a stick or literally drag you to hell, Where is that these days, Gray?
I do feel like the really weird, over the top child traumatization is missing from modern parenting. I'm not going to say it's not for the best, but there is the sort of really crazy folkloric fairy tale threats that people would give their kids. Hey, don't go down to the river, or the crazy woman will drown you there. That kind of stuff. I feel like there was a reason for it, even if maybe it wasn't the best parenting advice ever.
To quote Eddie from Ed, Ed, and Eddie, little childhood trauma builds character.
What's really crazy is I'm not sure that there's not some truth to that.
Just the kind of character you might want to build, you know?
Well, I have to say that I am definitely a character, and I was definitely built, so, I mean, it at least does function. It works.
Yeah, but that was in somebody's basement.
Just because
You-
I was built like a creature mail ordered from Amazon with some of the parts missing is no reason to call me out like that.
Being
feel like-
Frankenstein off Wish is nothing to be proud of.
Get with the times. It was Timu.
But you were born like 30-something years ago. Wouldn't it have been like Wish at the time or something, some predecessor to it?
I am almost 40, and I am so before that was a thing. I would have been like from the Montgomery Ward catalog or some shit. We did not have online ordering when I was born.
Yeah, I'm from around the same time. I think that I was ordered from the Sears catalog and put together by somebody who really didn't know what they were doing. Because let me tell you something. Constantly stretching my back to get it to work. Yeah, somebody screwed up.
Are you trying to say there might be a screw loose? Bump.
Oh, many.
But so, talking about the evil Santas and the different stories we tell kids, I actually want to talk a little bit about Santa proper, though, before we get started on our proper evil Santas, Krampus and his like. So, Hatter, I want to ask you, if you had kids, which, of course, for anybody who doesn't know us, neither Hatter or I have kids, and that's definitely for the best. But, Hatter, if you had kids, how would you handle telling them about Santa Claus?
There are two sides to me, Gray. There is the side of me that studied psychology and genuinely wants to impart good mental health onto people. Then there is the agent of chaos. So I'll tell you what both of them would do. The good guy would probably, wait for them to figure it out and then ask them, what do you think? Do you think there's a Santa? I want you to tell me exactly what you think. And if they get it right, tell them, well, good job. You're growing up. Now, the agent of chaos would probably say, the shotgun I keep in the gun locker? Well, Santa Claus is splattered all over the inside of the chimney because of it.
Which is definitely the kind of childhood trauma that will build some kind of character.
Well, I'll tell you this too. I don't have kids. I don't want kids, and it's a good thing that I don't have kids. So like it's a win-win-win that I do not have any children.
I definitely feel the same way. I also have a weird plan for how I would handle the Santa Claus issue. Mine is less one way or the other, black and white, and it's more in the middle, just really weird. Because I wouldn't want to lie to the kid. I wouldn't want them ever thinking that I, as their parent, wasn't as honest with them as I could possibly be. But at the same time, I also don't want to be that parent who tells their kid from a very young age that there is no Santa Claus and robs them of the wonder of the world. I feel like the appropriate way to handle walking that line in between is to turn my kid into a conspiracy theorist. Oh, hear me out here. I am going to, whenever that kid comes up to me and says, hey, I heard about Santa Claus in a movie or at school or whatever, Dad, is Santa Claus real? I'm going to tell them, well, some people certainly think he's real. Some people don't think he's real. And there are lots of things in the world that people can't agree if whether they're real or not. And I would begin introducing them to things like cryptids, the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, Yeti, the Black-Eyed Children, the Flatwoods Monster, Jeff the Talking Mongoose, and every other sort of weird cryptid and alien you can possibly think of. I would have this kid with a giant wall of evidence in his room with strings connecting them, proving that Santa Claus is indeed real, or at least might be, including connections to, like, Odin, and how he might actually be a Norse god. So this is what I would do if I had a kid, which again is probably why it's a good thing that I don't.
Are you implying that Bigfoot isn't real?
I am implying that Bigfoot, Santa, the Tooth Fairy, and Jeff the Talking Mongoose all very well could be real, and no one can prove they're not. Jeff the Talking Mongoose, by the way, is one of my favorite cryptids, and we are going to have to do a cryptid episode just so I can talk about him.
But I'll have you know, Bigfoot visits my backyard on a regular basis. He is real.
Hatter, are you sure that's not just you with your shirt off going to check the mail?
You know what? I have a story for this. Do we have time for a quick story?
I think we do.
So I am a cryptid in my old neighborhood. Me and some friends were hanging out, having a bonfire, and I had a bit too much hydration, if you know what I mean. We're not on TikTok. I was drinking, and I have. Do you know what browning out is?
Yes.
So for those of you who don't, it's kind of like blacking out, but you remember things in like little pieces. And long story short, there is a picture of me that was floating around my old neighborhood, shirtless with a cowboy hat on, trying to get to the 7-Eleven to get pizza. We don't know where the cowboy hat came from, and we don't know where my shirt went. So yeah, I'm a cryptid. I'm proud to say.
Perhaps one turned into the other through the process of transmogrification.
These things do happen. But anyway, I'm sorry I cut you off with my crazy Bigfoot speech. You had something more to say about that, didn't you?
Absolutely, because the nature of belief and Santa Claus are hand in hand. I think one of the best media to ever talk about it was Terry Pratchett in his Discworld series, which, if you're not familiar with Discworld, this is Terry Pratchett doing his very own fantasy world, and it's a mirror of ours, or specifically England. And in his world, instead of Santa Claus, they have something called the Hogfather, which kind of looks like a piggy-looking Santa Claus, but he actually has this entire thing where, much like our Santa Claus, it's based on much older legends that have to do with the cycle of the seasons and rebirth and that sort of thing. And I want to quote a character from the Hogfather because it is such a fantastic quote about belief. You don't need to know too much about the story of the Hogfather or too much about the character saying it, other than the character is literally Death, the Grim Reaper, and just because he's one of the main characters of the books. And the plot of the story is basically just that someone kidnaps the Hogfather and tries to destroy him, and Death is explaining why the Hogfather is so important. So I'm going to read Death's opinion on belief for you right now. "All right," said Susan. "I'm not stupid. You're saying humans need fantasies to make life bearable." "Really? As if it was some kind of pink pill?" "No. Humans need fantasies to be human, to be the place where the falling angel meets the rising ape. Tooth fairies? Hogfathers? Little... Yes, as practice. You have to start off learning to believe the little lies. So you can believe the big ones? Yes. Justice, mercy, duty, that sort of thing. They're not the same at all. You think so? Then take the universe and grind it down to the finest powder and sieve it through the finest sieve, and then show me one atom of justice, one molecule of mercy. And yet," Death waved a hand, "and yet you act as if there is some ideal order in the world, as if there is some rightness in the universe by which it may be judged." "Yes, but people have got to believe that, or what's the point?" "My point exactly. And that is why I would teach my kid to be a crazy conspiracy theorist who turned 40 still believing in Santa Claus."
You said duty.
I did indeed.
But I do like that. All joking aside, I do really like that quote because there is some truth to that. Because like everything that does make us human, it is kind of made up outside of the meat and bone and poop that's inside of us. What else is real that makes us human that separates us from the animal? It's all made up stuff.
Well, there's a Neil Gaiman quote talking about, of course it's imaginary, that's why it's important. All the important stuff is imaginary.
And that's exactly true. Everything that we consider to be important as human beings, knowledge, even colors. Colors are imaginary because they don't exist if we're not there to see them. Color is the way our eye filters light.
And they vary depending on how your eye filters light. There's the wonderful thought experiment that how do I know that when I look at red, it looks the same to me as it looks to you when you look at red? Because there's no way for us to know.
You know what? Before I fall into a crazy existential thing here, let's keep moving.
Exactly. Let's avoid existential dread and get back to very real dread and talk about the horrors of Christmas, specifically starting with Krampus.
Krampus, of course, as they're all going to know most of the stuff about Krampus, but we're going to talk about it anyway, right?
Oh, absolutely, because I think you would be surprised because it wasn't that long ago, I would probably say 10 years ago maybe, that pretty much if you were American, you probably had no clue who the heck Krampus was. It has become, with the rise of the internet, a lot more common to be aware of Krampus, but I still feel like there's probably a lot of people who might be learning about Krampus from us right now.
I'll talk a little bit about him. He comes from Germanic folklore. He's a demonic looking creature, goat legs, horns, basically what you might imagine the satyr idea of what a devil is. His name actually comes from Old High German and it means claw. And I have a very interesting thought on this. Would you like to hear it?
Absolutely. Lay your theory on me.
Now, you know what a malabranch is, of course, don't you, Gray?
Yes, this is a type of demon.
Exactly. It's a demon from Dante's Inferno. They rule over the circle of wrath and they drown people in boiling pitch. They're described as hooved beings. With one long nail, they used to chop people up if they escaped, so on and so forth. Dark skin, horns, very much like how one would describe the Krampus. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Malabranch means evil claw. Krampus in Old High German, as I may or may not have already mentioned, means claw. Therefore, I believe that the Krampus is a retired Malabranch.
Which I even really like that idea, that this is a retired demon who has decided to participate in the Christmas tradition in the only way that he knows how, through terror and murder and kidnapping. I love the idea.
Oh, and he gets pretty bad. Let's talk about some of the things that Krampus likes to do to bad kids. If you're lucky, well, if you're real lucky, he doesn't even show up. But if you're lucky and he shows up, you get whacked with a stick. You maybe got some bruises and marks. As it gets worse, he will take some kids and drown them in ink, which sounds absolutely worse than just drowning. And that's another connection with the Malabranch is they tend to drown people in boiling pitch. It's not quite as bad, but, drowning, dark substance, that's there. And finally, the absolute worst kids, he takes them straight to hell.
And since we're talking about Krampus, I do want to reference the Krampus movie from, I think it was about 2015, which was actually a really good movie. And I thought partially a really good interpretation of Krampus. The only thing I didn't like was literally when they showed their Krampus's face, and rather than having a cool goatish demon face, he just sort of had this rictus corpse face. So I wasn't a big fan of that part. But other than that, I thought they did a good job.
Interrupting. Actually, weirdly enough, the new movie that came out, Red 1, has one of the better looking Krampuses I've seen. And it's just the weirdest place to have a good, creepy looking Krampus.
In case anyone's not familiar, Red 1 is the movie where The Rock plays Santa's bodyguard. And while overall it's a kind of a weird movie and has some ups and downs and it's not really great, it has some fantastic ideas and a lot of respect for the folklore of Christmas.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet. And I was supposed to watch that one you recommended with
Violent Night.
That's the one. I was supposed to watch that, but it's the week of Christmas and things are really, really busy, so I apologize.
Oh, absolutely no problem. I can nerd out on this movie enough by myself.
I'll tell you this too, one of the horrors of Christmas is getting ready for it.
Oh, absolutely. Just the sheer number of things you need to do in preparation is its true horror.
Yeah, I mean, you got to get clothes for your Christmas parties. You got to buy presents. You got to find out what people want. There's secret Santas, smearing blood over the doors so the angel of death. Wait, am I thinking of the right holiday anymore?
No, I think you shifted like 2 holidays to the left.
Oh, well, anyway, still.
Although, weirdly, I think that should still totally be a Passover tradition, the whole lamb's blood on the doorframe thing.
Absolutely. I mean, you don't want the angel of death coming into your house. He comes in, he drinks all the milk, and he kills you too. That's bad enough.
Okay, I think you might be confusing him with fairies. I think we have a lot of confusion in this episode.
I have a lot of confusion in my head.
I think we have a lot of confusion in life, but I'm willing to roll with it.
Oh, anyway, back to Christmas.
Back to Christmas, and as I said, the one Krampus movie was actually pretty good. I did like the fact that when the Krampus stole you away, he locked you in a snow globe. I thought that was pretty cool. It did also have the requisite cool, well, in this case, German grandmother. I was about to say Russian grandmother, because I'm always a fan of Russian grandmothers in, various... I'm a fan of that trope in any movie. But this time it was a German grandmother, and she was still super cool.
My favorite scene in the whole movie is when the Russian grandmother explains everything, or the German grandmother explains everything to everybody. And, everybody's like, well, what did she say? And the other grandmother says, she's saying we're fucked. And they're like, how did you know that? And she says, I'm pretty old. I know when life's coming at me with its pants down.
And I love that line. That is a great
I
line.
use that line a lot. I say a lot. I'm old enough to tell when life's coming at me with its pants down.
So that's kind of the general vibe on the Krampus. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is there's a lot of variations on the Krampus because in so many cultures, especially in Europe, we have Santa Claus, which is the good character of the Christmas story that comes and brings you presents. However, in most of these, there is also a duality. There's the other character that punishes you if you've been bad. And it kind of varies from depending from culture to culture and country to country. And there are some just super cool versions of that in addition to the Krampus. The Krampus is a little bit of all over the place. He's in a lot of these different cultures, and I do feel like some of these other unique versions have been influenced by him over time. Like one I want to bring up is a Scottish version called Crum Dhu. And Crum Dhu is kind of like the Krampus, except in modern times, sometimes people will say he kind of has horns or is demony, but traditionally, they wouldn't say he looked like anything because anyone who sees him dies. Because the whole idea is that leading up to Christmas, if the children in the house have been bad, he will sneak up onto the roof and howl and scream down the chimney to scare them. And on Christmas night, he will come to visit the house of naughty children to leave coal and things like that. And if you stay up trying to see Santa Claus, you might see him instead. And if you see him, you will die horribly. So while in America we say, don't stay up and see Santa Claus or he won't leave you any presents, they say, don't stay up or you might see Crum Dhu and die. Which makes sense when you think about the fact that Scotland's national motto essentially translates to fuck around and find out, so it totally tracks.
I'm a fan of Scotland. Fun fact though, I have seen Crum Dhu.
Have you?
Yeah, I was downstairs getting something to drink. I didn't have a shirt on, so he actually screamed and left.
That sounds perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, I describe him, but it's kind of like Cthulhu. You see it, and you just don't know how to describe it. I tend to be immune to cognito-hazardous stuff because my brain is scarier than anything the internet could create or the world could create. But yeah, I've seen him.
I do sort of love the idea of a character that is so cursed they can't be cursed anymore. Your mind is already full of too much cursed information to ever be affected. I do use the phrase, I am a jumble of curses a lot. Have you ever, this is a little off topic, but have you ever read the Courtney Crumrin books?
Not.
It's like the first one's Courtney Crumrin and the Night Things, Courtney Crumrin and I think it's like the Autumn Court, whatever. But basically, it's kind of like it's a comic book series. It's kind of like a dark Harry Potter kind of thing. And she faces in one of them a creature called Tommy Rawhead and Bloody Bones, which is one of my favorite boogie monsters, Evil Fae. And at one point, a magician tries to curse Tommy as he's coming to kill them. It's very dark, very edgy. Really loved it as a kid. My gothy teenage heart loved this story. And one of the things that Tommy says as someone tries to curse him is, "You cannot curse me, little human wizard. I am a jumble of curses." And I just love that idea. That's what I'm referencing whenever I talk about the jumble of curses idea.
I'll tell you, if you see my YouTube history, if I could be cursed, I would be already. I must have listened to that Japanese poem or whatever that's supposed to kill you about 600,000 times in the last 10 years.
Are you trying to say that you have a copy of the video from The Ring sitting on your bookshelf?
Oh yeah, that's kid stuff though. Are you familiar with the poem I'm talking about? This is a little off topic, but we'll make it quick.
No,
Oh, it's called Tomino's Hell. Have you heard of that?
vaguely.
You know what? I'll read it out loud in a short at some point in the near future, just to prove things.
So if you are watching us on YouTube, or even if you're not, make sure that you swing by YouTube and check out our shorts in addition to these episodes, because we put some cool stuff like that on there all the time.
Yeah, and you might even hear me curse myself.
And I think we're all here to watch Hatter try to curse himself.
People have always loved it. But circling back, many, many creatures like this, things that parents invented to scare their kids to be good around Christmas time. Again, in America, it's you won't get presents. Everywhere else, it's you'll die, you'll suffer, you will burn for eternity, you will wish you had never been born. France, of course, has Père Fouettard. I probably terribly mispronounced that, and I hate to really sum this up so simply, but he's basically the same idea as the Krampus. He hits people, minus the drag them to eternal suffering and killing thing, because Krampus is from Germany. That's Germany. but it's a similar idea, just a bad Santa that's going to punish you.
And I want to mention real quickly another essentially version of that that's kind of the much simpler, which is Black Peter, which generally this describes his clothing, although I will say that in a few countries let's say they make a sort of insensitive and unfortunate interpretation of Black Peter and leave it at that. But most of them, it's just a Santa that's in black. However, his big thing is he carries an 8-foot black bullwhip with him to punish naughty children.
Depending who you are, that might not be a punishment.
So what you're saying is Black Peter is BDS&M Santa handing out punishments?
I mean, for the adults, obviously only for the adults, but yeah, why not? You know, some people are into that sort of thing.
I'm here for Black Peter being officially labeled NC-17 Santa Claus. You must be naughty and at least 18 to 17 years, 17 to 18, depending on your country of origin and their specific laws, before you can be visited by the Santa Claus.
I'm going to say chaotic neutral. I'm going to say he's the chaotic neutral rewarder. Because let's be honest, anybody who's into that stuff, they're definitely chaotic neutral.
I totally agree. Chaotic neutral BDS&M Santa Daddy.
Well, that's the thing you heard here, folks, and that you will never forget.
And I do take full responsibility for having cursed you with this cognito hazardous material, and I will officially take my place on the naughty list.
Well, you know, just let him know. Well, if Krampus shows up, let him know he owes me $50. If Kromdu shows up, tell him I'm still thinking about him, and he should still be afraid. If Black Peter shows up, have a good time.
Circling back to our more official outline, another really weird, spooky thing of Christmas that I wanted to talk about is, well, okay, specifically I wanted to talk about the horse head on the stick, but more specifically, or at least more vaguely, I wanted to talk about the wassailing tradition. Have you ever heard of wassailing, Hatter?
Yeah, it's when you're out on the ocean, but you have a lisp.
I can see it, but no, we're talking about something specific.
Oh,
Interrupting. Wassailing, motherfucker.
yo,
It's in a
hilariously,
song.
She is right.
Hilariously, I didn't know what you were talking about until she corrected your pronunciation, because that's not on the list.
That's awesome. We're leaving all this in, by the way.
Absolutely.
So, wassailing, Worcestershire sauce, whatever you want to call it.
Don't make
Wendigo.
me borrow Black Peter's bullwhip.
We have our own black bullwhip.
It's a cat of nine tails. Get it right.
Oh, that too.
Well, you want to get the upgraded version, so you know.
So, anyway, it's basically the tradition of going around and asking people to give you booze. And in all of Great Britain, it has kind of the tradition of mummery, where people would dress up in weird costumes and kind of perform these weird plays and stuff. Specifically in Wales, they have a character called Mary Lloyd. And there's, of course, I'm not going to even try to pronounce it with a Welsh accent. But this is a character that is a horse skull on a stick with the person holding the stick covered by a white or black sheet, so that all you see is this skull bobbing around under this sheet. And they go around surrounded by the mummers, and the entire idea is they sing at you asking to be let in and to be given booze. And you sing at them that you will not let them in, and you essentially participate in a rap battle with these guys, and if you fail, then they all come in and you have to give them booze.
I just had a thought.
What's the thought?
Is wassailing adult trick-or-treating?
I think so. And I'm here for it.
Never before have I needed something so much and not known it until I heard about it. Circling back, there's Belschnickel. There's not much to say about him. He shows up in The Office, of all places. What's his face? The beat guy talks about him. There's really not a lot to say. Once again, very similar to the Krampus, minus the killing and dragging to the underworld. Oh, he comes from Pennsylvania Dutch tradition. I should probably mention that too.
That absolutely makes sense. Pennsylvania Dutch tradition. Although, just in case anyone isn't familiar with Pennsylvania Dutch, I do want to explain that's what most people would call the Amish. Although it's a little more, there are various versions that are not just the Amish, but for in all intents and purposes, it's what most non-experts would call the Amish. And when we say Pennsylvania Dutch, the Netherlands is not involved. There are no Dutch people involved. They're called Pennsylvania Dutch. They're actually Germans. They are from Germany originally. They spoke German. The problem is when people would ask them what language they spoke, they would say Deutsch, because in German the language is not called German, it's called Deutsch. Germany is not called Germany, it's called Deutschland. So whenever the people ask them where they're from, they say, "Oh, we speak Deutsch and we're from Deutschland." So they go, "Oh, you must be Dutch." And that's why they started calling them, with the ones who were in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania Dutch, when really they're Germans. So I just wanted to clarify that in case anyone didn't know.
The Germans love scary stuff, don't they?
Germans are scary as hell. One thing I will say that Sharon and I have this entire thing that we talk about. We're going to have to do a whole episode on this. Is what the hell was going on in the Black Forest, basically from like the 1300s to the 1600s, because all the scary ass fairy tales that have bases in reality, like the Pied Piper, which by the way, Hamelin is a real place in Germany that maintains that happened for real. It was all in Germany, all in the Black Forest, all during this time period. They had werewolves, they had all sorts of crazy stuff going on there, and we're going to have to do a whole episode on just the crazy shit going on in Germany.
Absolutely will. Germany is a very interesting company, and even if you take the really real life, actual scary stuff out, from the 30s or the 40s, we're never going to bring that up because why would we? But we have a lot of scary stuff out of Germany we can talk about. I mean, look at their language.
The language is very aggressive. My favorite weird thing, and I mentioned the werewolf thing, is there was a guy in Germany who was convicted of being a werewolf because he volunteered in court, someone else's trial, by the way. He was not on trial for being a werewolf. They were on trial for being a witch, and he basically said, "Nah, they're not a witch. They weren't where these people were testifying that they were, because I'm a werewolf, and I was out on my way to hell to go fight the devil because I'm a good werewolf that works for God. So I was on my way to go fight the devil, and I saw them where they were supposed to be, so I can testify that they're innocent."
It was certainly a series of words.
The judge, by the way, at the time, the guy could have been executed for that, but instead, the judge decided, you know what, this is stupid, had him whipped and sent out of the courtroom.
We knocked some sense into him.
And which I'm not convinced was not entirely the right action.
I gotta tell you, I was saying, though, about the language. You know what the German word for ambulance is?
What is the German word for ambulance?
Krankenwagen.
And what does that mean?
Nurse truck or nurse car.
Which makes perfect sense, but is so aggressive. Although I do have to say, some of their words are incredibly cute. Like, do you know the word for bat?
It's like, it means, I don't remember the word. I know it translates to fluttermouse, though, or flying mouse.
A fluttermaus. Yeah, it just
Wow.
fluttermaus.
What do you call those?
Raccoon is Vashbar, which is... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, what do you call those words that sound the same in different languages?
I'm not sure if there is a word for it. There should be one.
Well, there is, but you continue. I'll look it up while you're talking.
But there are so many good ones like that. Like, raccoon is Vashbar, which means washing bear, which I absolutely love.
I do like that. People always... There was a joke in the Mario movie where when he had the raccoon suit on, Luigi said to him, "Why do you look like a bear?" Oh, the word, by the way, for a word that sounds the same in every language is cognate.
Oh, that makes sense.
So we know that now. But I'm sorry, we don't want to flutter too far off a track. What else do we have to talk about in the Evil Santa's list? I think we got a good one up here.
Yeah, actually, and I know that you're probably a bigger fan than I am, so I'll let you cover Futurama's Santa Claus, because that's its own whole ass thing.
Okay, so Futurama, they've got Robot Santa, and Robot Santa's whole idea was he is a robot that was built to be Santa, do exactly what Santa does, reward the nice kids, punish the naughty ones. But he has an AI, and we talked about that was that the previous episode to this one?
I think so.
Yeah, we talked about runaway AIs, and he started deciding that everyone in the world was naughty, except for Zoidberg. Zoidberg was the only good person in the world, which I'm totally okay with. And, he terrorized the world, blows stuff up, and it's just absolutely fantastic. And they also have, of course, the Hanukkah zombie and Kwanzaa bot, Fun fact, Kwanzaa was played by Coolio, rest in peace.
You know, there are certain voices that just show up in the weirdest places.
Absolutely, Coolio's been in a lot of stuff. But you know what? We could talk about 90s hip-hop all day. We're here to talk about Christmas. I could talk about 90s hip-hop all day, but we're here to talk about Christmas.
So, one thing that I want to talk about that I want to sneak in here is I want to talk about Christmas presents that we either did get or wish we had gotten that themselves qualified as horror stories, because I feel like there's a lot of the really weird toys and presents and things that were either horrible in a realistic way or were just ominous as crap.
Oh, yeah, I got actually a few, and I apologize for forgetting to add them to the list, but I've got a few more than we have on our list here. It looks like we have one that you're going to talk about here. Why don't you tell us about My Buddy?
Okay, My Buddy dolls are very interesting. They look almost exactly like Chucky. They came out, of course, before the Child's Play movie. And they look a lot like him, and they have basically a tape player in the back, and the mouth moves and the eyes move. It's essentially an animated doll. And a buddy of mine had one of these dolls, and they are creepy as hell. And he decided after he had watched the Child's Play movie that he was scared of this doll, and she told him she did. However, she didn't. She just kind of put it into storage. So later it got moved back out. He, thinking this thing had been thrown away, suddenly found it back in the living room and absolutely lost his shit, thinking this evil doll had come back for him.
Just chef's kiss. That is fantastic, and I love that.
And I'm going to go ahead and throw in Teddy Ruxpin's in here, which is basically the same thing. You put a cassette tape in the back, its eyes moved, its mouth moved, and I cannot tell you how many people I know who have stories, unconfirmed, I cannot personally confirm them, that them telling me, I took the batteries out of this godforsaken thing and it kept talking. I don't know if that's true, but I can't tell you how many people have told me that story.
I can tell you this. Some circuits on these old things required very little power, and they could store a certain amount of power if the batteries were left in long enough. So that probably did happen.
I definitely heard it from enough people that I consider it credible.
Well, I mean, we could use the same logic for creepypasta, but that's, again, for another episode. Now, one of my big things I wanted so bad as a kid, and I'm really glad my parents never got me, you remember creepy crawlers?
Yes. Go ahead and tell everyone what that is in case they're not a 90s kid like us and didn't see the 3,000 commercials for them.
So there was this device. It was like I hate to put it this way because, no one toy is for any one gender or idea. If you like the toy, play with it. But it was like an easy bake oven for boys. And of course, it made bugs. And it made them with this plastic substance you would pour into these molds, and you would put it in the oven, and it would heat it up. First of all, this is why I'm glad I didn't have it. The vapors it gave off were highly toxic. Apparently, some kids got sick off of it. And my final thought on it is just, what would I have done with all of these plastic wiggly bugs? You can't even eat them. They made one that made candy bugs. And of course, they had the Harry Potter potion set, which I got for Christmas. Now, I was never a big Harry Potter fan, and we're not going to dwell on that because it's a minefield. I was never a huge fan. I did get the potion set as a kid, though, and I could not make it work.
And the really interesting thing about the creepy crawlies, and you mentioned the fact that they were not edible, the problem is I'm not sure that was always accessibly communicated to people, and they looked very edible. And while I'm not sure of any lawsuits about kids eating them, it just seems like the sort of thing that's a bad idea to put out there because it looks like something you should eat and it's being given to a kid. And I can't help but think that this was our generation's version of Tide Pods, where it was just kind of a dangerous thing that I'm glad more people didn't die from.
I can tell you this, too. Nowadays, even, because I was out Christmas shopping a few days ago for my nephew, and we were looking at just little things, because, he's 3 years old. If he gets something, he's happy, but I wanted to get him something he'd have fun with. And I'm looking through, all these Play-Dohs and stuff like this, and they're all flavored. They all say, candy this, cheeseburger that, and then in very tiny letters, not for eating. Some of the ones I saw, I swear to God, I did not know were toys at first. I thought it was some kind of toy candy. I thought you were supposed to eat it.
I definitely think that there is not enough delineation between what you are supposed to eat, what you aren't supposed to eat, and what you can and cannot eat without dying, which is an entirely different category.
Well, fun fact about my brother, as a kid, we weren't allowed to have Play-Doh because he would eat it. And to this day, he maintains that blue was the best tasting Play-Doh.
That absolutely sounds like a thing that someone would do as a kid. I do also want to point out that just mentioning the color and the taste thing did remind me that I have my little brother, who is grown now, of course, but my little brother is a Marine. Recently became a Marine about a year ago, and we of course tease him about being a crayon eater because that, if you don't know any Marines, that's the joke, is that Marines are dumb and eat crayons, which is a joke they are in on. This is not actually being down on Marines. This is the joke. They love this joke. That they're crayon eaters, and whenever you make the joke with him, he'll simply insist that red's the best color.
No, I will say this. First of all, my grandfather was a Marine. He actually was overseas during World War II, and he would never talk about it, but I like to think he killed a few Nazis. But yeah, on the subject of Marines, I put it this way. There are a lot of people out there that I would not hesitate to get into a fight with if they push me far enough. I would never get into a fist fight with a Marine.
Well, my favorite joke slash not a joke, pretty accurate statement that everyone in the military I've ever told this line to has totally agreed with me, is that every branch of the military is really just a glorified gang, except the Marines. They're a cult.
I like them even more now.
And every Marine I've ever told that to went, "Mm, yeah, that's accurate." And seeing how my brother changed, by the way, completely for the better, because he was kind of a, mischievous kid, got into a little bit of trouble, nothing too crazy, and he came back just very squared away, very mature, doing much better for himself. So I have nothing but love for the Marine Corps. Had an uncle who was a Marine in Vietnam. My grandfather was Army in World War II, although he actually didn't get to Germany until after the war, so he just got to do the fun peacekeeping stuff, so he didn't actually get to off any Nazis.
It's kind of like showing up to a birthday party after everybody left and just getting to eat the leftovers, right?
That was pretty much his thing. He talked about how great the beer was in Germany.
Oh yeah, the Germans make great beer. I mean, well, no, the stout is Irish. The stout is Irish, right?
Well, the thing is, I want to say stout is actually made in a bunch of. So I think there are German stouts and also Irish stouts. I think people think of Irish stout just because of certain brands that are really popular.
Yeah, ultimately, well, my first beer was a Guinness, and ultimately, a stout is the only beer I still drink. If I have beer like twice a year, and it's always a stout.
Ah, Guinness. I love to chew a fine beer myself.
The fun fact: I have a friend who was a brewer, and the term they use for a heavier beer, for the heaviness of it, they call it chew factor.
I believe it.
Oh, it's true, 100%. But we got to circle back here because this is not the beer episode.
This is not the beer episode at all. So back onto the topic of the crazy toys, I actually want to talk about Easy Bake Ovens just because we kind of have to, because Easy Bake Ovens were a cool idea. Basically, it allowed kids to bake very small amounts of baked goods using a hot light bulb. The problem is it was a very hot light bulb, hot enough to bake goods. So yeah, a lot of people got burns from them because it didn't come with a lot of instructions on how to safely use them, and even if it did, you're handing it over to a kid. So yeah, Easy Bake Ovens are one of those things. I don't even know if you can still get them, although I wouldn't be surprised if you still could, because when it comes to toy safety, we're on a constant roller coaster of, you can't have this, it's too dangerous. Fuck it, it'll sell, it'll be fine. So we have like this weird up and down thing on toy safety. So I don't know where we currently are on Easy Bake Ovens, but I do know they had a reputation for being kind of dangerous.
Oh, you think that's bad? There was a metalworking toy for kids once. It came with metal beads and actually melted them and let the kid put them in molds. I'm not kidding.
That's wild. I would have loved that as a kid, by the way.
So, and I just looked it up while I was saying that. There is no easy bake oven like there was back then. There are ideas. There's like similar things, but they're just like tiny ovens. And instead of opening like an oven, it kind of goes through on a conveyor belt. So, whoever's making it can't touch the bulb. So they kind of reworked it in a good way.
That makes sense. And speaking of just wildly crazy dangerous ideas, I of course have to mention lawn darts, which in case
Oh,
people go ahead.
that's all. Oh,
In case people aren't familiar, lawn darts were literally these big, sharp metal darts with fins on them, like a good almost, foot long. The whole idea was you would throw them into like a ring with points. So it's basically like playing darts, but on the lawn. And so you would throw them and compete with throwing them. And of course, that's not inherently dangerous in itself on its own right. The problem is they did not take into account that kids would have the idea to throw these darts at each other, which of course they did. And lawn darts got a huge lawsuit, and it became a class action lawsuit because so many kids had been injured by these darts. And I want to reiterate, the only way to get injured by these darts is to throw them at someone. And they still sued, they still won. And I actually used to work with a guy who was one of the people who got money from the lawn dart lawsuit. And yes, he did have a big scar on his head where his brother had hucked a freaking lawn dart at his head.
I'm just saying is all. I think if you handed firearms to some people, these people would put on bulletproof vests and say, let's have a gunfight.
I have seen that video. It did not end well.
Now, I saw another video. There was an influencer. Oh, God, I hate influencers, but they had a 45 Desert Eagle. Now, do you know how powerful a 45 Desert Eagle is?
A Desert Eagle comes in a variety of calibers, and none of them are small. So yeah, super powerful.
Yeah, so they said, oh, I bet it can't shoot through this book, and had their, I guess you'd say partner, holding a book in front of their chest and said, let me shoot through the book. Now, Charles Darwin might have something to say here.
I'm going to guess that this did not end well for anyone involved.
Nope, some people were in prison, some people were in the ground, exactly what you'd expect. And a 45 Desert Eagle, I will say once again, it'd probably blow you in half if you got hit the right way.
Yeah, anytime you point a firearm at another human being, it really should be someone that you intend not to exist anymore, because that's literally violating one of the first rules of firearm safety. There is no such thing as something that reliably stops bullets, even if it is a ballistic shield or something that's designed to. But circling back to kind of our Christmas gifts, because hopefully no one is handing a 5-year-old a Desert Eagle, although I do have a friend who did just give his granddaughter, who just had her first birthday, a .22 rifle. But there is a reason for that. He wanted to be the one to give her her first gun, and she probably will not be allowed to shoot it until she can at least, walk.
Well, I gotta tell you, a .22 is basically a toy. Anyway, that's a joke, everyone. I'm all for gun safety laws and all that. I am just kidding.
Well, this is a family that is very much firearm enthusiasts, to put it lightly. And yeah, he knew, well, of course, her dad would have eventually wanted to give her a gun. He's the granddad, and he wanted to make sure that he was the first one to give her a gun. So he got in on her first birthday to make sure that no one could get in before him.
Nice work. And I'll say, you know, I'm a gun guy. I'm just, I'm about safety, and I believe in you know what? I'm going to stop there. We're not going to say anything controversial. I'm just going to say I believe in safety.
And gun safety is the most important thing, and that's definitely something everyone should be able to agree on.
Exactly. On the note of things that are unsafe, though, before we move on to this next one, I thought of another one while we were just talking.
What's that?
Now, I know that there was one for girls and one for boys. Again, just play with whatever you want. Just have fun. But the boys one was called a dragonfly, and the girls one was like I guess a Tinkerbell or something. And it was this thing. You know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about. It was basically a little spring-launched helicopter that basically, for everyone, it looked like a little person with wings out that were the blades, quote-unquote, of the helicopter. And when you pulled the string, it spun it really fast and it shot up into the air.
I'm also going to say shout out to Good Mythical Morning. They're the ones who reminded me of this. But yeah, oh my God. So many kids kids were half blinded by these things. I think one kid actually lost an eye. Kids had fingers broken. These things were quite dangerous.
Well, because they made them really, really powerful. There's actually a different toy that you still see all around that's essentially a helicopter blade on a stick, and you put it between your hands and you spin it and it shoots up into the air. That's much safer, and you still see those. These were spring-loaded with a string that you pulled, and they were just really powerful.
I did see a video on YouTube a while ago where a kid got one for Christmas, and she pulls the string and it flies straight into the fireplace.
That sounds like something that would have happened to me as a child.
Yeah, I had some degree of bad luck with toys as a kid, but that's bad.
So I will say that one of the other ideas on the list here that I'm not going to say is dangerous, although I definitely know a lot of people would believe it is, which is definitely going to be entering the danger of an entirely different category, is the Ouija board. Because I know people that if I were to bust out a Ouija board, they would leave the house.
I can tell you this from experience. You know, if you know what you're doing, which is to say it's a toy to scare people, you're fine.
That's one thing I have found. The only use I have ever found for a Ouija board is to have at least one gullible person in your group make it move and then watch them freak out. That's the only fun I've ever found with it. Now, like I said, I know people who absolutely believe in the spiritual element of Ouija boards. They believe that they are dangerous. They believe they'll invite in demons. They'll believe that they will put you in contact with ghosts, whatever. All I'm going to say is I have never seen a Ouija board move when I could not figure out who was moving it.
I'll tell you what, we'll ask the people in the comments. Should we do a live where we mess with a Ouija board at some point in the future?
Because I would be totally down for that. We could totally see what we can scare up with a Ouija board. I am down for making an effort if that is something people would like to see.
Tell you what, folks, if we see enough... Sorry?
I was interrupting. Public service announcement. If you're going to mess with your friends on Ouija board, kind of know your friends well before you do. Speaking from personal experience, there will be one asshole in your group who will accidentally bring up somebody's trauma with their dead mom and their murder by their stepdad.
Okay, that is a really good point. If you are going to play a prank on your friends, please try not to traumatize them too badly.
Unless that's your goal, of course.
Well, I think we did say key friends. Don't traumatize your friends too badly.
Yeah, I can agree with that. You can tell that my shoulder devil often wins. The shoulder angel is always getting his hair done. I mean, really.
To be fair, it's probably really nice hair.
Probably. But what do we have next on the list?
Well, one thing that I feel like is an entire category of unintentional Christmas horror is Rankin Bass and the stop motion Christmas movies. Because that's like an entire category of media from that. And it's all very unintentionally horrifying.
For sure. Like, well, you know, stop motion's always going to be a little creepy. There's a liminal space thing there. First of all, the liminal space in between still images and moving pictures, they fill that category. And look at some of the backgrounds. Now, to me, I love the way those backgrounds look, the way that they look like they're not quite real, but they're so detailed. You know what I'm saying here?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, again, that's kind of what I love about stop motion. Because, of course, I'm talking about how horrifying it is. And it is definitely to an extent. But I also adore stop motion. It's one of my favorite media of all time. And you're right, it has this kind of in-betweeny kind of phase. And I love how it is and isn't realistic. And it is and isn't something that looks natural. And kind of having that both things at the same time is one of the things I love about it.
Can also just bring up the amount of dedication it takes to make one of those. Like, just shout out to anybody who's ever made a stop motion film. I considered trying it myself once, and I got impatient after recording about 6 seconds of video footage.
If you ever want to develop an entirely bizarre new level of respect for someone, watch a making of Coraline. Because actually, Coraline at some point we'll have to discuss in some episode, because it's one of the greatest actually it'll probably be in the kids horror episode, and Coraline is fantastic by Neil Gaiman, really great show. But one of the things about it is the amount of dedication, the amount of models, different models, modular models, the amount of work that went into making all the stop motion for that show, it's just mind-boggling.
I think you mean mind-bottling.
It could probably bottle it, boggle it, boogle it, and probably several other made-up words too.
At least 2 of those words were in the dictionary, Gray.
And who died and made Merriam-Webster God is what I want to know.
Jesus?
I don't think he died for Merriam-Webster. Okay, he supposedly died for... Let's move on.
Yeah, okay. So what do you think were some of the creepiest characters, creepiest looking things in Rankin Bass?
I gotta say, while there's definitely lots of stuff, the Yeti from Rudolph is its own thing, so that definitely had some spook factor, and I thought was creepy looking as a kid. But I don't think you can beat Mr. Heat Miser and Mr. Snow Miser for sheer creep factor. And their entire song and dance routine and everything, definitely the creepiest thing in Rankin Bass.
I'm going to tell you this, too. I think that Snow Miser was the cooler of the 2 brothers.
But-bum. Ching!
But in all seriousness, like, really think about this. Think about how powerful these guys are.
Well, and before we get into the power scaling, because I do want to talk about that, just the song, just the song and the lyrics had such a great creep factor to them. I'm Mr. White Christmas, I'm Mr. Snow. And just that the when you really listen to it, if you kind of take out the upbeat sound from it, it's just ominous as hell, and I love it.
You know the story of what happened to the guy who played Snow Miser?
No, I don't know the story.
So Snow Miser was played by comedian Dick Shawn. Dick Shawn, the way he died, he was on stage doing a show at one point, and his shows were crazy over the top. Like, he really went for it. And he had a heart attack on stage and hit the floor, and people thought it was part of the show, so they didn't do anything. They just sat there laughing. And it took about 10 minutes for somebody to call anybody, and because of that, he died.
That absolutely sounds like something that would happen in a comedian show that would also result in like a haunted stage, haunted character, or something like that.
I mean, obviously, the fact that he died suddenly was unfortunate, but even more, just as unfortunate, did you ever see the Miser Brothers Christmas?
No.
It was a sequel made years later. They got all of the original voice actors. They got Mickey Rooney as Santa Claus. They got Scott Irvin as Heat Miser. Editor's note: it was George S. Irving, not Scott Irving. Obviously, they couldn't get Dick Shawn as Snow Miser. The guy they got sucked.
That's always an unfortunate likelihood whenever you try to recast a voice actor when the original voice actor, for whatever reason, is not available. It's almost never going to be the same, and it's almost never going to be what you want.
And you know who was alive at the time? Fred Willard. Tell me Fred Willard would not have been perfect to play Snow Miser.
No, I could definitely have seen him stepping in. So, Hatter, let me propose an idea here. Who do you think is more powerful, Snow Miser or Sub-Zero?
I'm going to say Snow Miser for one reason and one reason only. Snow Miser can control the weather. Weather is big power. I mean, what's her face? Storm from the X-Men, Omega level mutant.
Absolutely, and that's my exact same thought too. Now, don't get me wrong, if it comes down to hand-to-hand combat, we assume Sub-Zero, which of course is Mortal Kombat for anyone who's not familiar, a fighter from Mortal Kombat, is definitely going to win in hand-to-hand combat, although I don't know that we specifically ever find out that Snow Miser doesn't have hand-to-hand combat skills. For all I know, he does his off time in an MMA gym, but we're going to assume that Sub-Zero is probably the superior hand-to-hand fighter. But as far as the sheer ice powers, I definitely think it goes to Snow Miser.
And for the people who don't know who Sub-Zero is, message me, because I got to talk to you about your Rock's extended warranty.
Now, while that's definitely the creepiest Rankin Bass, I do want to talk about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which is probably one of the most popular, well-known versions of Rankin Bass. And one of the true horrors of that, because of course, I mean, obviously it's not really horror, but one of the true things of that is what the moral of the story is, because I have always liked/hated, I like bringing it up, but hate that it is the moral of the story, which is, if people don't like you, if you can just make yourself useful enough, they will eventually tolerate your existence. And I hate that as a moral, and I don't think there's really any getting away from the fact that that is kind of the moral of the story of the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
Rudolph should not have returned.
Rudolph should have gone off, started his own thing, created a competing Santa Claus tradition, and outcompeted the people who did not appreciate his power.
Precisely, because, I'm actually reminded of a scene from that 70s show. There was an episode where they were making fun of Kelso for watching those Christmas movies, saying they're for kids and stuff. And Kelso falls asleep and he has this dream where he's talking to all the characters from it, and Rudolph shows up. And Rudolph said they wouldn't let me play in their reindeer games. And Kelso says, so what did you do? He says, I kicked him in the face. Blitzen bled like a faucet. That's what he should have done.
And I will say, had that been a real reindeer, that would have been what he would have done, because I feel like that is reindeer's go-to move. When in doubt, kick it in the face.
That was my go-to move, but then I got fat.
I will say that there was a time when I was in Taekwondo that I could reliably kick someone in the face. Now I could absolutely kick someone in the face. I would just have to kick them in the leg first.
No, do it the way you got to do it. But I do want to talk a little bit more on the subject of Heat Miser and Snow Miser, because we talked about how, Snow Miser is quite powerful. He would defeat Sub-Zero. How powerful do you think these guys are?
Well, we run into an interesting thing of cartoon logic here, I think, which whenever any creator of any cartoon character is asked how powerful is X character, usually their answer is he's as powerful as he needs to be for the joke to work. And while, of course, this is not strictly a comedy kind of thing, that's one thing I think we get here is I think they're as powerful as they needed to be for the story to work, which in the case of this story ended up being really ridiculously powerful because they had to be able to extend their preferred weather, be it snow or heat, to like the entire operating region that we're seeing this story about. So I do think because of the needs of the story, they're crazy powerful.
I'm also going to say this. I was going to ask which of them do you think is more powerful, but with the prevalence of global warming, I think we already know.
Which that's definitely one way to take it. Although I will say that I think, like in any type of storytelling where you have a dichotomy, where you have light and dark, hot and cold, by definition, for good storytelling, they need to be balanced. So I would actually say the two brothers are probably of equal but different strength.
Accept that. Now, we're talking about movies and Christmas, right?
Absolutely.
I think there's something we need to bring up that we're both kind of dancing around right now.
And what's that?
Okay, so I'm going to ask the question, and we're going to decide once and for all what side we're both on. You ready?
Ready.
Is Die Hard a Christmas movie?
Die Hard is absolutely a Christmas movie.
Okay, are you playing devil's advocate, or are you just the regular kind of wrong?
Hey, I am standing by this. This is the hill I will die on. It absolutely is a Christmas movie.
Explain.
All right, here's my entire thoughts on Die Hard being a Christmas movie. Because, of course, it has the initial requirements, which it happens during Christmas. It has some of the trappings of Christmas. You know, we see Christmas decorations. At one point, he has on a Christmas hat. So, I mean, we definitely see that it happens during Christmas. We see some Christmas decorations. Of course, I fully acknowledge that does not a Christmas movie make. I'm down with that. I get that's not the deciding factor. Here's my thing, and this is what, to me, clinches it as a Christmas movie. Because a Christmas movie has to be about Christmas themes, or at least feature Christmas themes. So this can be themes like family, like generosity, like charity, all the things that have to do with Christmassy, Christmas stuff, love, and all that kind of stuff. Has to have Christmas vibes. One of the big things with Die Hard is that he is trying to reconcile with his family. And one of the major Christmas themes is always there's nothing more important than family. You know, all I want for Christmas is you. You know, I don't care if I get any presents as long as the family's all together. You know, reconciling couples is a huge part of Christmas traditions. In the Krampus movie, that's the thing. The parents are alienated and they have to come back together. So that is why, because it deals with themes of family and togetherness, it is 100%, in my opinion, a Christmas movie.
And togetherness are correlated with Christmas, but I don't think, you've heard the old saying, a correlation and causation. I don't think it's the causation. I think there are a lot of other minute things that are involved with Christmas. I think jolliness is a big part of it, which is why we often see themes of family togetherness and reconciliation and so forth, because those are happy things and Christmas is happy. I don't think those make it a Christmas movie, and I think that most people's thought is that it happens. And I know you have better reasons, so I'm willing to listen to you. I won't fire you from the podcast for that.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's your Christmas present. But ultimately, a lot of people think it's a Christmas movie simply because it happens on Christmas and there's a Christmas party. And if you're going by that logic, Step Brothers is therefore a Christmas movie.
And while we could probably stretch credulity and try to pretend that it is, in that case, I would just be playing devil's advocate and also just be regular wrong.
Exactly. Step Brothers is a fantastic film, by the way, but we should move on. There's a lot of films out there that people have had this discussion about. Some that actually are about Christmas. Some of them are B movies. We're going to talk a little bit about our kind of Christmas movie and a few that, as I mentioned, are arguably Christmas or not Christmas. What are you thinking about, Gray?
Well, one of the movies I want to bring up, and that I still, while it definitely comes up in the discussion of Christmas and is related to the holiday, I'm really not 100% sure if it should count as a Christmas movie, which is the original slasher, or again, we could argue is an original slasher. It did come out before Halloween, which is Black Christmas. Now, it's literally called Black Christmas. However, And it happens during Christmas, and there are people making Christmas plans, but I feel that's really incidental. And if anyone's not familiar with Black Christmas, not to spoil it, but it's a super old movie. Basically, there's a bunch of college co-eds getting murdered. It's actually, while it's not the first horror movie to have the call is coming from inside the house trope, it's like the second one. It's one of the earliest ones. And it turns out that there's a killer in kind of a Santa suit kind of thing going on, going around murdering all these people, and he's been hiding in the attic the whole time. They never explain who he is. It's just a random dude named Billy. So it's kind of a weird movie in its own right, but it's essentially a slasher that happens to happen at the same time as Christmas and has a sort of Christmas element to it. But I really don't know, even though it is literally called Black Christmas, I'm not sure I would count that as a Christmas movie, even a Christmas horror movie, even though it's definitely trying to be.
I'd call it Dial M for Christmas.
I like it.
Ultimately, I would say, yeah, that's one that's even more arguable than Die Hard. Because, you want to lean toward, because it's called Black Christmas, it happens on Christmas, but the Christmas themes aren't 100% there. It's a slasher film, much like Step Brothers. Step Brothers is not a Christmas comedy, it's just a comedy, even though Christmas is involved.
Oh, exactly. I would actually almost argue that I would call Gremlins more of a Christmas movie than I would call, or Christmas horror movie, than I would call Black Christmas. Because in Gremlins, the themes of Christmas, I mean, for one, the decorations of Christmas are really big. I mean, they literally get used to kill people. We actually have a ton of tie-ins to it. Family and togetherness are actually factors. I mean, it's all interspersed with horror, but the family getting together and exchanging presents, Gizmo is literally given as a Christmas present. So Gremlins definitely has, in my opinion, almost more Christmas elements than Black Christmas does.
Interrupting. Not to mention there's a whole plot point that the one girl's father died by crawling down the chimney.
That's true.
And that's a much more realistic depiction of crawling down a chimney, because people have died that way. That's just a fact.
Now, here's one that is not exactly horror. I want your opinion on this one. It's not horror unless you think about it a certain way. But Home Alone. Would you consider Home Alone a Christmas movie?
I'm gonna say it takes place on Christmas, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the fact that the whole family is getting together for Christmas and traveling for Christmas is the main conceit of the entire thing.
I don't think it's a Christmas movie. I think what it is it's a slapstick cartoon in the form of live action.
Oh, 100% agree. Now, I did share with you whenever we were getting ready for this episode a theory that is very popular on the internet that, while I'm not saying I completely agree with, I do love the discussion of, which is the idea that Kevin McAllister, the kid from Home Alone, grows up to be the main character of Saw, which I love the idea that he grows up, becomes an engineer, gets cancer, becomes very upset, apparently changes his name to Kramer, and then starts torturing people in saw traps. So I love the connection between Jigsaw and Kevin McAllister.
I love the idea, but I don't see any connecting information or supporting evidence. So I'm just going to say I enjoy it, but it definitely isn't true.
Oh, 100%. Totally agree. And of course, one more movie that I have to bring up that is not a Christmas movie at all. I more want to bring it up just for the point that just because Christmas is involved does not make it a Christmas movie, is Batman Returns.
Exactly. I actually often forget that film takes place on Christmas. And fun fact, Batman Arkham Origins also takes place on Christmas.
Which is, like I said, such a great example of just because it's on Christmas does not mean it is a Christmas movie.
Exactly.
Now, of course, whenever we're talking about what it is and isn't a Christmas movie, I feel like we cannot have that discussion without possibly one of the most iconic Christmas horror-themed things in all of existence, which is Nightmare Before Christmas. And I feel like this is so relevant to this section of the discussion specifically because people are always playing the game of, is this a Christmas movie or is this a Halloween movie? My particular take is that it is both a Christmas movie and a Halloween movie, and that's kind of the whole point of the movie, is that those two can interact, those two can exist at the same time. The spirit of Christmas and the spirit of Halloween are both valid, and they are both definitely present in this movie. What do you think, Hatter?
Well, I'm going to tell you one thing. If anything this episode has taught us, it is just that. It is that Scary things exist in both. Happy things exist in both. They're both great holidays. We don't need to argue over which one's more important.
Absolutely. And I, whenever I was younger, my little gothy heart was absolutely obsessed with anything Tim Burton and Nightmare Before Christmas specifically. And some of it, I think what really just caught me and captured me and made me love it was the beginning song, This Is Halloween. And I loved every part of This Is Halloween, but one of the parts that just really captured my imagination was the part where it was specifically like the bed monster singing, I am the thing living under your bed, teeth big and sharp and eyes glowing red. I am the thing living under your stairs, fingers like snakes and spiders in my hair. I am the shadow on the moon at night, filling your dreams to the brim with fright. And just, oh my God, that always gave me chills. And that was just so the creepy, gothy element that it just tickled my little heart and was always something that I loved. And that made me love the whole movie.
Yeah, my personal favorite song in the movie was the song that Lock, Shock, and Barrel sing about capturing Santa.
Kidnap the Santa Claus, lock him in a sack. Yes, I adore that one too.
And
And
like, I can't. I was just gonna say I can't even say why. I think just generally, I think it's a good song. It's got a good melody. It's catchy, and it's just very, very well written.
Well, I also think it's the combination of kind of twisted lyrics with the very cheerful tone. I think that's a really powerful combination.
Oh, and they managed to combine a cheerful tone with like a really good kind of minor creepy melody. It's very well done. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Nightmare Before Christmas. Obviously, I loved it when I was a kid. I was a goth kid too. For a long time, and I hate to say this, I couldn't stand it because so many of the mall goths that were in my school would not stop talking about it. And that was when, I was a kid and I thought fitting in was a good thing. Now as an adult, I realize it's really not. It just makes you boring. But I wanted to find my clique, so to speak. And they're like, oh, you're not a goth kid, this and that. It's like, dude, do you even know who Nick Cave and the Bad Seed are? They're listening to Rammstein. I'm listening to Depeche Mode and Nick Cave and all that stuff. And I'm like, I was the real one. I realize as an adult that gatekeeping is bad, but they did it first.
Well,
But the point,
absolutely. And of a hallmark of gothy culture is trying to be gothier than the other person until you mature enough to realize we are all goth in our own way.
oh yeah, and ultimately, again, for a long time, I didn't care for the Nightmare Before Christmas because of those people, but then I grew up and realized it is, of course, still a masterpiece.
Absolutely. Another thing I love about it so much is Oogie Boogie's voice. And the I'm the Oogie Boogie man, and you ain't going nowhere. I mean, just I love that because of course half the voices in this thing are Danny Elfman. Danny Elfman, of course, is the one who wrote all the music. Jack is Danny Elfman. But I forget. Actually, I think we did look up the name of the guy who did Oogie Boogie's voice, and he's just an absolute masterclass in how to do a fun, creepy, soulful voice. I just loved it.
Joking.
You're joking. You're joking. You haven't got a prayer.
Yeah, I enjoy, and I would say, and to bring back another word we know, I would say Oogie Boogie is somewhat Draculian.
Okay, weirdly, I would say Oogie Boogie is like half of a Draculian character, and Jack is the other half. Because they both have half of the types of features we would expect to see in a Draculian character. So it's almost kind of like a yin and a yang a yin and a yang Draculian character kind of situation.
Yeah, that puts it perfectly. I agree. Were
Although
there any?
go ahead.
I don't remember super well The Nightmare Before Christmas. I haven't watched it in a while. Were there any vampires in it?
Yes, there were 3 of them. They were all different heights, and they were just sort of a running sight gag, but there were 3 vampires present singing in the This Is Halloween song.
Gotta give that a watch because it's seasonally appropriate. The only thing I have to say is, for the same reason, This Is Halloween. Not wait, was it? Yeah, the opening song from that movie for me was ruined by Marilyn Manson. Because can we just say it as two people who are formerly goth kids, and once you are that way, you're always that way. Marilyn Manson is a friggin' poser.
He's definitely not someone I was ever into. I never saw him as really being like legit. And I totally agree that the problem with his version of This Is Halloween is he was trying too hard. Because what is so cool, the charm of This Is Halloween is the fact that it's creepy without meaning to be, without trying to be. And when you try really, really hard, you get try hard syndrome, and it's just not going to be as effective.
Pretty much describes his entire self. He's anyway. We're not gonna sit here and make fun of Marilyn Manson the whole episode. What else do we have to talk about?
Let's see. Actually, that kind of leads us into just Christmas horror in pop culture in general, because there is so much of it, and it's just there as part as you said, Christmas and horror go together. There's that Halloweeny horror element all throughout Christmas, and it's really present in the entire pop culture representation of Christmas.
Well, of course, both holidays come from pagan holidays, and there's a lot of what we would call horror these days in all of that.
Absolutely, because there's a lot of different pagan holidays that Christmas kind of draws its DNA from. One thing that people will say is, "Oh, it's just a pagan holiday that they slapped Christian paint on." And that's not really true. It really is a whole cloth Christian holiday. The cloth that they made it from was a bunch of different or pagan holidays. Like one of the things everyone talks about Yule, but kind of modern Yule is very different. Ancient Yule was more like a whole season. There were definitely lots of solstice celebrations. Of course, all the way back to Rome, there was Saturnalia, which was the kind of Saturn's holiday, and that was definitely more of a ruckus, horny festival kind of thing. So which at one point in America, Christmas was more of a rowdy secular holiday. It was actually banned in early America for being too rowdy. So it definitely has its roots there as well. But one of the things I wanted to bring up is kind of the solstice celebrations that you see in a lot of different pagan traditions, because like there's a musician called Dom the Bard, and he has a song about the Oak King and the Holly King, and this kind of changing of the guard of who is in control of the season. And of course, the winter solstice is when that happens. And he has one of the songs talking about the Holly King, and I love the lyrics of it, and it definitely brings in that Christmassy horror vibe where he's talking about, "And I shall be as the dark Holly King, cold wind and snow, and my cloak I will bring, and on midwinter's night it's to me you will sing." And I just love that idea of the winter being personified, and this being the solstice, the longest night of the year, that being where a lot of that pagan tradition in Christmas rather comes from.
Hey, fun fact. When you're listening to this, it's not going to be the case, but while we're recording this, you do know tonight is the solstice.
Yep, you will actually probably be listening to this closer to Christmas. We're actually recording this on the solstice, which I would also like to point out is my wife's birthday, Sharon. And if you've ever wondered who that weird female voice you occasionally hear that we never bother to introduce, that is my wife, Sharon.
We'd better see some happy belated birthdays down in the comments.
Absolutely.
Advance, thank you.
But anyway, yeah, I love that. First of all, I love anything like that. All that like old world kind of mythology, or however you might put it. There was a song by Equilibrium. Do you know them?
No.
They're a folk metal band. They sing in German. Once they started singing in English, their music suffered. Unimportant. But there's one song they have called Des Sangers Fluch, which is the Bard's Curse. And they mention a frozen throne and stuff, and it just made me think of that. This isn't really related. It's just something I thought of.
Well, absolutely. And vibes always count. Another thing I want to talk about is the Yule log, which is kind of the idea of, in case you're not familiar with, a log would be dressed up. They actually called it dressing the prince, quotation marks, and would be decorated, and then it would be burned as part of this ritual of rebirth. And then you would take those ashes and you would either use it to start your hearth. You would either use it to start your hearth for the first fire of the new year, or you might sprinkle it over your fields. So there's definitely this idea of death and rebirth. So that's another element, and I think is one of those reasons that it's definitely just an intrinsic part of the holiday, is this kind of darker element.
Isn't dressing the prince something you do to keep yourself from having babies?
That sounds like an excellent euphemism that I will be using from here on out.
I'm glad I could help. But I'm sorry. That joke wasn't written into the script, folks, and I'm making myself laugh right now. Give me a second. Okay. So anyway, though, the very idea of a Christmas tree, to me, has kind of a horror element to it. And I got this idea from, you know, Metalocalypse, right?
Yeah.
So, like, there's this whole episode where they're arguing over whether Christmas is metal or not. And from our perspective, it is. But there's a scene where Nathan Explosion, he comes in, he's like, "Oh, I don't know, it's kind of metal. I mean, it's like you drag its corpse in and dress it up, effing humiliate it and stuff." And I'm like, yeah, you know, that's kind of metal.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things I want to talk about, because we're talking about pop culture, I feel like we can't talk about horror and Christmas without talking about A Christmas Carol, which has been present in about 5 million different interpretations throughout all the media.
I would hazard a guess to say it is probably the most adapted to screen bit of literature in history. I might be wrong, but I feel like I would bet a decent amount of money on that.
No, I think you're 100% correct. And I feel like there's been some excellent adaptation, like Scrooged, which what was from the 90s, right? I think that was really good with Bill Murray.
That's one of my favorite Christmas movies.
I think it's really good. It definitely has some awesome horror elements because, of course, in Christmas Carol, we have the horror element where it starts off with a literal ghost. So you've got that. And then, of course, we have the Ghost of Christmas Future, which is an excellent horror element, which in Scrooged is done very well. Very spooky character.
And can I just talk about this? Isn't really horror related, but it has to do with Scrooge. There was that scene at the end where Bill Murray's character gives that speech about how he's ready to enjoy Christmas and everything. Was an excellent speech. Can anybody even lie about that?
No, that was a terrific speech. That overall was just a really well-written movie, and I feel like a lot of people now who aren't as old as we are maybe don't appreciate that in his day, and especially in the right movies, Bill Murray was kind of a genius.
Yeah, fun story about Bill Murray. Sidetracking a little bit, but I read a story once that he went into a Wendy's once, and there's somebody sitting there eating their food, and he took one of their fries and ate it, and the person looked up like they were going to say something and just kind of paused, and he said, "No one will believe you."
I want to believe that so much. That is the
I
most
do.
awesome thing.
He's Bill Murray. I fully believe he did that.
I have no trouble believing that at all.
But yeah, back to Scrooge. There was a lot of horror stuff in that. First of all, the basic horror of just dealing with the holidays. But, you know, of course, the Angel of Death, not the Angel of Death, the Ghost of Christmas Future in that one, the practical effects on that almost put H.R. Geiger to shame.
Well, and I am such a sucker for practical effects. You know, at some point we may even have to do an episode specifically talking about horror with excellent practical effects, what our favorite effects-based horror is.
We do. I didn't mean H.R. Geiger. Who did I mean? The Fly.
Cronenberg. I don't know if
Cronenberg,
he's
yes.
alive, but he's definitely one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, Cronenberg is who I meant. I'm not cutting any of this out. People can hear this and just deal with it.
And Geiger, in case anyone's wondering, Geiger was a kind of futurist artist. He's actually the one who drew the idea for the aliens from Alien, though he wasn't, he didn't like do the makeup, but he drew the original concept.
Well, he also did a lot of Danzig's covers. You know, the band, the musician Danzig?
Yeah.
He designed a lot of the covers for his albums.
So circling back to Christmas Carol, because I have got some more to say on this one. Weirdly, I think one of the best interpretations, and I'm definitely not alone on this one, is the Muppets Christmas Carol. This is weirdly the closest to the book that has ever made it to screen.
I would agree when you said one of, because Scrooged is my favorite interpretation of the Christmas Carol. Second would actually be a tie between Muppets and Disney, but we'll get to Disney in a moment. I'm sorry, continue. You were talking about the Muppets Christmas Carol.
Absolutely. And like I said, just for accuracy to the book, it's kind of famous for being the best one. As far as an interpretation, not necessarily the best movie in and of itself, although I do think it's really good. However, they did do one change that I want to bring up that they did change from the book that actually points out what the true horror of the Christmas Carol is. Because I will say, they even did a pretty good job of the horror elements in the Christmas Carol Muppets version with the Ghost of Christmas Future. Again, pretty spooky, did a good job with all that. But one thing they changed is several times, at least twice, they actually refer to Scrooge as a crook or a criminal, and they refer to his crimes. The idea that he was cheating people out of their money. Whereas in the book, they are very, very specific to point out the fact that Scrooge was legally doing nothing wrong. In fact, that Scrooge was very, very adamant that he always followed the law, he always followed the rules. In fact, that's one of the things he complained about when someone said you should give to charity. He said, I already pay taxes. I give the exact amount that is required of me by law. Whenever he would basically he was doing usury. He was lending people money at exorbitant rates that they would never be able to pay back. This was totally legal. It wasn't his fault that they were legally taking out loans they couldn't pay. That's not his problem. Everything he was doing, he followed the rules completely exactly. And that's something they changed kind of for simplicity's sake in the Muppets version. But I think it's so important to keep that element that's from the original book because it points out something that I think people should know and is a good lesson for people, that he was completely a law-abiding citizen. By the rules of the system he existed in, he did nothing wrong, and yet he was still a greedy old sinner who was destroying his life and his soul. And it is entirely possible that you can obey the rules, obey the laws, and still be a very bad person. And I think that's an important lesson.
I 100% agree. They should have kept that idea that he was, within legal rights in it. It's a good lesson for kids because kids know things in black and white, and they need to learn that because something's legal does not mean it's okay. I mean, look in real life. We have some CEOs who do some pretty horrible stuff, who, deny a third of healthcare claims, who don't pay their employees enough, who don't, cover them with insurance and so forth. It's like, well, what I'm doing is within the law. Well, you know what? You're still a rat, a B word. I can say these things on YouTube. Why do I still have my TikTok filter on? I'm sorry. What were you saying?
I have a bad habit of doing my TikTok filter as well. Although, even on YouTube, I'm just going to leave it at, sometimes that has consequences and just move right the hell along, not discussing that in any way.
Moving along, moving along. Anyway, I want to talk a bit about the Disney version. Have you seen it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a classic.
I have to say, the one thing that I have super mixed feelings about in that version, they mostly did everything perfectly. Scrooge McDuck as Scrooge only makes sense. Donald as that happy-go-lucky guy whose name I can never remember. What was his name? He's like Scrooge's nephew?
Actually, wasn't he Cratchit?
No, Cratchit was his worker. Cratchit was his employee.
Who was Donald, then?
His nephew. No, Cratchit. I don't know who played. No, Mickey was Cratchit in that. And Donald played his nephew, his super happy nephew, who's trying to get him to come to the family Christmas party, but he knows he's probably not going to.
Oh, right. I do know.
Fred.
Yes. Where was I? Oh, well, they got every character perfect in that, except the Ghost of Christmas Future. Now, they picked the perfect character if they were gonna have a character represent him. But they shouldn't have. He should have been silent. What makes the Ghost of Christmas Future so great is that he's just this silent, solemn, real thing. I mean, obviously he's a ghost, but he's this very real idea of the future. And at the end of that movie, he takes down his hood, and you got Pete smoking a big cigar, and Ebenezer, asks the famous question, "Whose grave is this?" And he goes, "Well, it's yours, Ebenezer. Now lie in it," and kicks him into it. Really cool scene, but not in spirit with the book.
Oh, no, I totally agree. Both that if they're going to put a Disney character there, it being Pete is the perfect choice. But I agree that also keeping it just as a nebulous character would have been a better idea because it's the unknown. That I've actually heard the theory that the reason the Ghost of Christmas Future never speaks is because nothing is set yet. He's just basically a blank slate that Ebenezer is reflecting off of because he can't speak because there is nothing set in the future yet, which I don't know how accurate that is, but I thought it was an interesting idea.
I think it's pretty accurate. I'm gonna say this too. I love that scene. That scene is so cool, and I have such mixed feelings about it because it's so well done. Pete's one of my favorite characters. It's so scary, but it just doesn't fit with what the character's supposed to be. So I have very rarely have feelings this mixed on anything.
Absolutely. And I do totally get that, how we can have a love-hate relationship with any piece of media. Although, speaking of a piece of media that I have a complete love, no hate, just absolute adoration for, I want to take this opportunity to talk about Violent Night.
Yeah, I had some homework. I was supposed to watch that, but thanks to the holidays, I didn't have time. So we're just gonna let Gray take it away on this one.
which I can absolutely do. Violent Night, in case you haven't seen it, there's going to be some spoilers here, but you're just going to have to deal with that. I love this movie. It is basically a Christmas action movie. I'm going to go ahead and count it as horror, quote unquote, at least horror adjacent, because it's super bloody, lots of gore, so you can enjoy that as your horror element. It's definitely more of an action movie, though, where we have Santa Claus, who is kind of struggling with his faith in the holiday. He loves the kids, but the adults don't have the Christmas spirit anymore. And there is this little girl who his family is all messed up. It's a very, very rich family. They end up getting taken hostage by terrorists who are trying to get their money all on Christmas. And she ends up having a radio where she is sending messages to Santa, which is an entire just fun little thing her parents did for her. But he actually ends up getting the radio and talking to her, the very real Santa, and him deciding he's had enough of not interfering and he's going to go rescue her. Cue Santa Claus in a Die Hard like combat where he is taking out in hand to hand combat all these terrorists. And if that seems a little weird that Santa Claus is out there physically killing people with his bare hands, he actually, when she asks him where he came from, he points out that he used to be a Viking named Nikolaus the Red, or Nicomund the Red, who killed people with a giant hammer. And he does such a great job of explaining to this little girl, talks about, I was very greedy and I took what I wanted, and him talking about how he kind of became reformed. And they never really say how he became this Santa Claus, how he became this figure, but I actually have a theory. I have my own headcanon, and it involves Baba Yaga. Are you familiar with Baba Yaga, Hatter?
Of course I am. Yeah, she's the witch. She eats people, mostly children. Yeah, I know her.
Well, and has the house with chicken feet. She's a very important Russian figure. Well, she often has a daughter, who sometimes is literally her daughter, sometimes isn't, but who is also a witch. This is, by the way, this has nothing to do with the movie. This is purely my headcanon. My headcanon is there's this daughter of Baba Yaga who sees Nicomund the Red and sees that he is very greedy and very evil, and she curses him with kind of this Santa Claus thing that he can only now do good and only be generous and caring and everything that he wasn't. And he's cursed with this, and then he sees her finally, eventually, after some growth, comes to understand that what she did was for the best, falls in love with her, and she becomes Mrs. Claus. That's my headcanon. I'm sticking to it. But I love the movie. Violent Night is so cool. There's the whole thing that he is on the outs with Mrs. Claus a little bit, but you find at the end she sends him back his reindeer because they ran off without him with his spare sack. He saves Christmas after killing all the terrorists, and it's just a really super fun movie.
Super fun. I'm gonna watch it before Christmas is over. I mean, I got to edit this tomorrow, and I think before I do that, I'll probably treat myself to some Violent Night because it's on Max, I think, right?
I think so. Another element that they do is the little girl has just watched Home Alone. And so while the terrorists are taking over the house, he sets up some Home Alone style traps, such as having the paint cans hit you in the head and bowling balls falling on people's heads. But they do a better job of showing what that would actually be like, and of Santa Claus trying to make sure she doesn't notice what that actually looks like. And it's the whole thing of her being insulated from all this violence while all this uber violence is going on. So in my mind, the movie just gets a lot of extra points for actually showing what the Home Alone style traps would do to a person.
Imagine it's not pretty.
Absolutely not.
Right, so that's one to check out. And guys, again, it's on Max. I'm pretty sure. If I'm wrong, I apologize. It's something to check out on your Christmas night with your family if there aren't too many kids present, it seems like. But
Go ahead.
But on that note, we've seen a lot of stuff that kind of parodies Christmas, and I would say that's a bit of a parody for sure. It's a more serious one, but certainly a parody. And what about the greatest parody music artist of all time, arguably?
That's gotta be Weird Al Yankovic.
That's Weird Al Yankovic. Now, you know that he had that crazy song about Santa going crazy.
Absolutely. The Night Santa Went Crazy is hilarious. If you've never watched it, just go to YouTube right now, type it in. If you're watching us on YouTube, do it in another window, just listen to it. It's fantastic. And it's talking about Santa going crazy and murdering everyone at the North Pole. Like, it's talking about he carved up one reindeer like Freddy Krueger and shot another with an old German Luger. I mean, it's just absolutely batshit. and it's Weird Al wonderfulness, and it's a wonderful Christmas song. Actually, back whenever me and my wife Sharon were dating, she had an entire one of the first CDs that she ever gave me was a copy of her Christmas comedy playlist, and had that and a bunch of other really bizarre Christmas songs on it. Like one was Ho Ho Fucking Ho, which is another absolutely hilarious, definitely not horror related, but is a hilarious Christmas parody.
You know, they don't drop enough F-bombs on Christmas. But speaking of parody and crazy B-movie stuff, why don't we talk about some ridiculous Christmas movies that actually exist?
Absolutely, and I want to do one better than that. So me and Hatter are going to tell you guys about some crazy, ridiculous Christmas themed B movies. Here's the thing, we're going to work in a couple that do not exist. We're just going to make them up. But we're not going to tell you which ones are real and which ones we're making up. So I want you to guess in the comments which ones you think we actually made up and which ones are real honest to God Christmas movies that you can go watch.
And if you get all of them, we'll even shout you out in the next episode.
Absolutely.
So let's start with Better Watch Out. I think that was one of your additions.
Yes, absolutely. Better Watch Out is definitely border on B movie because it's actually quite good. But the entire idea is that there is a babysitter at home taking care of this like 13, 14-year-old boy somewhere in that vicinity. And he kind of has a crush on her. And she's, of course, trying to be responsible and not be mean to him. But of course, she's a responsible person. So nothing's, of course, ever going to happen. And they start getting some Scream style serial killer stuff going on in the background, and he's trying to like look all cool and brave for her. You find out by the end that this is all just a big fake put on by him, and he is the one pretending to be the serial killer. But by the end, he's not pretending anymore. He kills her boyfriend, he tries to kill her. It's all part of this idea of trying to get her for himself. And the real horror ends up being the entitled little suburban kid, and it's actually really creepy. It's got a lot of Bad Seed vibe to it, and is a surprisingly good flick.
I personally have not seen it, but that's one I have to check out as well. Now, I want to move to a more recent one. And I'm going to say right now, they stole this idea from me. I know what some of you are thinking. Okay, Harlan Ellison. But you know what? I wrote this as a short story when I was in like high school. The idea of a kid who might be dyslexic, I can say it, I'm actually dyslexic, writing to Santa Claus and accidentally writing to Satan. I'm talking, of course, about the recent Jack Black film, Dear Santa.
No, 100%. That has been a joke forever, and I love the idea that it's finally getting a whole movie.
Yeah, it's been a joke forever, but it was my idea.
Absolutely, 100%. We're going to try to sue and see if we can get you these royalties.
Or we can just write to the devil and make a deal with him and get the royalties. But anyway, the basic idea of it is just that. This little kid, he tries to write to Santa Claus. He writes to Satan instead, and he gets Jack Black playing the devil, and I haven't seen it. I've seen bits and pieces, not just what's been shown on the commercials, but like I've had it on in the background a few times and just never got through it. It's a funny movie. I'm not going to say it's a masterpiece. I'm not going to say it's the funniest thing I've ever seen. But, you know, Jack Black's always fun. It was a pretty funny one.
Now, if we want to mention a B movie, for sure, I definitely think we have to talk about Silent Night, Deadly Night, which was definitely just done for the play on the title, and of course, the famous line.
Which day?
Silent Night, Deadly Night 2.
Okay, technically the Garbage Day line is from Silent Night, Deadly Night 2. Yes, that someone thought this movie needed a sequel.
Well, you know what? I've seen worse movies get sequels. I mean, Twilight got 4 of them.
Yeah, I definitely think that Twilight got a sequel can be used as justification to give almost anything a sequel.
So I haven't watched that movie in a very long time. Most of the time I just watch clips on YouTube. But as I understand it, there was an evil Santa and the kid witnessed bad things and grew up to be a serial killer. That's about all I remember, aside from, of course, Garbage Day.
And you know what? From everything that I remember and have seen from it, I think you just summed it up probably with more dignity than it deserves.
Most likely. But, you know, since we don't know much about this movie, why don't we move on to another pretty crazy one? Santa Claus versus the Devil.
And actually, I think this brings us into a section where I kind of want to speed run these movies, because the ones we've mentioned up till now, I think that most of the listeners, these are all pretty famous. They know that these aren't the ones we made. But I want to speed run this next section. We're not going to go too deep into any of these movies. We're going to kind of talk about them all a little bit. And this will be the part where we're going to sneak in some ones on you. So again, if you can tell which ones we made up, let us know in the comments.
Don't forget, if you get them right, you'll get a shout out in the next episode. So, starting our list of crazy Christmas movies is Santa Claus versus the Devil, and that is exactly what it sounds like.
It is 100% exactly what it sounds like, and does contain an image of Santa Claus shooting the devil in the ass with a little toy cannon.
Well, I think we've all been there, but if we're gonna try and speed run these, I'll move ahead a little bit. Jack Frost. What is Jack Frost about, Gray?
Jack Frost is a movie about an evil killer snowman that goes exactly as you would expect a movie about an evil killer snowman to go. And literally, that's just it. Insert icicle teeth here. People get eaten by a snowman. That's the whole thing. The next one I'm going to hit on this speed run is The Mean One, which is basically the Grinch themed horror movie. Again, it's basically a dude in a really bad Grinch outfit, I would like to point out, murdering people. That's the whole thing.
It is brilliant in its own way. Now, tell me something. I see you've added It's a Wonderful Knife to this list. I'm not familiar. Tell me what that is.
It's a Wonderful Knife is basically a retelling of It's a Wonderful Life, where the person wakes up and never existed except with murder. There's people being killed. There's a murder mystery thing. That's it. Again, pretty much exists to be a play on the title. That's pretty much the whole thing.
Next on the list, we have Red Snow, which is a story of Santa's elves becoming vampires and slowly moving out from the North Pole to do what it is that vampires do.
Which the scenes of the tiny little elves sneaking into people's houses and drinking their blood is some of the weirdest shit I've ever seen in my life.
Oh my god, and that line, I'm sick of candy canes, time to suck blood. Something
Is
like that. I don't
why
know if
it
I got
is
it right.
that kind of dialogue will forever cement this as the worst of B movies. Now, I do want to mention that there are multiple just cheap ripoffs of the Krampus, including one called Mother Krampus and one called Granny Krampus, which are just really lame Krampus ripoffs with female Krampuses.
Yep. I don't think those are necessary at all. Now we have Terrifier 3 on the list, which basically just takes place at Christmas time. It's about a killer clown, right?
And Killer Clown at Christmas Time. Again, it's Terrifier 3. I don't think anyone thinks this is one of the ones we made up. But yeah, it's the third Terrifier movie. By all accounts, one of the goriest, most extreme ones yet in that series. And yeah, pretty much just happens at Christmas time. But at one point, Art the Clown is impersonating quote unquote Santa Claus, and there's a kid involved. So, I mean, this is kind of Christmas horror-y. I mean, it's definitely during the time. So, I'm not going to say it's Christmas horror, but it is definitely a horror movie that's worth mentioning while talking about Christmas.
Absolutely. And I see you also added The Killing Tree to the list. Why don't you tell us a bit about that?
The Killing Tree is a movie about a killer Christmas tree that is as bad as that sounds. Lots of wonderful, and I do mean that ironically, CGI, including at one point there is a fight between an evil ghost Christmas tree and a good ghost Christmas tree as they vie for dominance.
Sounds absolutely amazing. Next on the list, we have Z Day Santa, which I guess is a play on Christmas Day. I don't know where they got this title, but the idea is Santa becomes a zombie and he can still use his sleigh. So it kind of, and this is actually one of the, what do you call it? One of the advertising lines they use for the movie. He's changing the definition of sleigh or the spelling. I don't remember exactly how they put it, but you get the idea.
And this idea of Santa going across the entire world spreading zombieism. It's a weird, not well executed concept, but has a lot of potential, and I kind of wouldn't mind a remake.
Did they have something about the gift of death or something, or was that a different one?
No, I think it was that one. It was like this whole gift that keeps on giving thing. It was weird.
Undeath, the gift that keeps on giving. I think that was it.
Yeah.
Okay, and speaking of that one, there's another zombie-themed B movie, Santa Claus, which is and since we're talking about zombies and Santa Claus, we have to talk about Christmas in the Apocalypse, another B movie, but one that I felt had a really strong idea that was just one good execution away from being something really special, which was Christmas in the Apocalypse, a movie about Santa Claus in after the zombie apocalypse, when now the only living children, not counting the zombie children, are now living in these survival compounds, and Santa Claus, kind of setting aside his non-interference policy, is now trying to deliver to these children the things they actually need. So you have kids unwrapping presents of food and ammunition and weapons that they need to survive in the zombie apocalypse. And then, of course, there's the whole thing where he starts interfering, and then there's consequences and all that. And it gets a little convoluted, but I love the concept of post-apocalyptic Santa Claus.
Honestly, that one, it was definitely a B movie, but it was on the verge of just being a good movie. They're just, the budget constrained it, some of the writing constrained it, but I really liked it.
Okay, and now you've definitely got to talk about Snow Wolf, because I know that's one of the ones you really enjoyed.
Oh, yeah, and this one, this wasn't, people call this a B movie, and I don't understand why. They use these amazing practical effects. The idea is pretty simple. And it's similar to Red Snow, similar idea, except one of the elves is a werewolf, right? And it really does it is just a good werewolf story. It's the other elves don't want to kill him. They know who he is. It's one of those situations where they're not hunting him because they actually know who he is. And they're trying to do what they can to help, and it gets real unfortunate, real sad ending, but straight up just a good movie.
All right, guys, so that was all a list of really tremendous Christmas horror B movies. Again, if you can tell which ones we made up, let us know. And if you do figure out which ones we made up, let us know if you would love to see any of the ones we did make up made into a real movie, because I certainly would.
And don't forget, if you let us know which ones were fakes and you were right, you get a shout out in the next episode.
Absolutely.
So, beyond that, we have a series that is legendary for its Christmas episodes. Now, this series, I like it and I want to love it, but I had friends who were so obsessed with this series, they never stopped talking about it. You make a reference to this series, despite the fact that I have never watched more than a handful of episodes, I will get that reference. That show is Doctor Who, and I'm just going to let Gray take it away because, everything I just said. Go ahead, Gray.
Well, and I am a giant Whovian. I don't watch a lot of classic Who. I'm familiar with classic Who, the old stuff from the 70s and what have you. But I'm really more of a modern post-revival Whovian, Doctor Nine and forward. But I love Doctor Who and everything about it. And as Hatter said, the Christmas episodes are such an important part of Doctor Who, and most of them have at least a semi-horror element to it. So we really can't talk about Christmas horror without talking about the Doctor Who horror elements, which I will take just a second to say that that's one of the things that's so cool about Doctor Who, is it's so many different genres. You might have one episode that's almost a rom-com, and then another one that's straight up horror, and then another one that's like great sci-fi fantasy, and it just keeps it really fresh and can be almost anything. But we're going to talk about 3 specific of the Christmas episodes, because I could sit here and I could tell you about every single Christmas episode they've ever had, and it would be interesting, but it also would make this podcast 7 days long. So I'm going to stick to 3 specifically. One is the original Christmas episode post-revival, which is called The Christmas Invasion, and this was the first episode, the first real full episode we see David Tennant's 10th Doctor in. So this is post the regeneration of the 9th Doctor. And we're, of course, getting to see, we get to see David Tennant. For one thing, he was in a previous episode, but this is the first full episode we get him in. So it's special with that, because David Tennant's amazing. He's a lot of people's favorite Doctor. I don't know that he's my favorite, but he's definitely one that I love.
He's mine.
He is Sharon's favorite Doctor.
I will say that as somebody who's not huge on Doctor Who, I like David Tennant. The other things I've seen him in, he's always very good.
David Tennant is very good. I will say, when I saw him be when I saw him be Kilgore in Jessica Jones, I'm like, oh my god, that's the best villain thing he ever did. That was amazing.
He was also in the DuckTales remake. He was Scrooge McDuck.
And I thought he did a very good job with that voice, actually.
Absolutely did.
But Now, the Christmas Invasion no doubt counts as Christmas horror. It has killer Santa Claus robots, first and foremost. So that absolutely counts. We get to see David Tennant learning to be the Doctor, including he had gotten his hand cut off and grew it back during his regeneration, and including the line, "This hand, I'm getting to know this hand. It's a fighting hand," as he then proceeds to sword fight someone. So it's lovely, and it really lets you get to know him. The big thing that I think brings the horror at the end of it is, of course, he manages to fight off the evil aliens that are invading Earth. They get back on their ship. He gives this really cool speech about how, and go tell everyone else in the universe that Earth is protected. And he gives this really cool speech. Then the humans, represented by the Torchwood organization, which eventually gets its own spin-off show, led by this one member of parliament, she gives a command, and they use stolen alien technology to blow up this alien ship as it's fleeing. Now, this is a ship that was trying to invade Earth, but it was already over. The Doctor had already neutralized them, and she killed them all when she didn't have to. And the Doctor is furious. And her making this entire point about, hey, we needed to show them that we would be feared and all this kind of stuff. And the Doctor saying, you know, I was wrong. I shouldn't have told them that Earth was defended. I should have told them, here be mon. And of course, there was this entire thing about how subliminal messaging was being used previously throughout the entire episode. And the Doctor, who is now furious with this member of parliament, looks at someone and says, doesn't she look tired? Which then starts this entire thing that destroys her career, and she never is important again. So he basically destroys her entire career for killing these aliens that she didn't have to kill. And the whole horror element being that we are the real monsters was a really great element of the Christmas episode, the Christmas Invasion.
Like that.
Another one, which it's actually really interesting, a Christmas episode is when we first got David Tennant. A Christmas episode is also when we lost David Tennant, where he called The End of Time, which has a couple of cool horror elements. For one, the Master, which is the Doctor's big rival, in case you're not familiar with Doctor Who, is trying to unleash the Time Lords, which are the Doctor species, which up till this point we've generally thought of as the good guys because the Daleks are the bad guys and they're the opposite of them. But the Doctor pointing out that, no, you don't understand, they were put in this time lock prison kind of thing, but they had to be, because by the end of the Time War, they were as bad as the Daleks. They had to, because the war had turned them evil, that they were monsters. And so they come out, the Doctor has to kind of defeat them, and we get this wonderful speech from the Doctor about after he has to basically sacrifice his life to save someone else, and we get this entire speech about how I don't want to go, which is so cool because whenever Ecclestian, the previous Doctor, had died, his entire speech was all about how, you know what, Rose, you were fantastic, and so was I. And he's bravely willing to go, whereas Tennant's 10th Doctor is talking about, no, I don't want to go. I don't want to die. I don't, and of course, in case you're not super familiar with Doctor Who, there's the entire idea that the Doctor regenerates, and it's the same guy, but it's also kind of not the same guy, and it's the same actor, or it's a different actor every time. That's actually why the regeneration exists, is to have a way to change out the actors. So the horror in that one, why I brought that one up as a good horror, is the idea that war destroys the humanity and all of us, that the real horror is war, and that even this very noble race that was like the Doctor eventually became evil due to the horrors of war.
Yeah, that'll do it.
And of course, I'm going to wrap up with my absolute favorite episode of Doctor Who ever, called The Last Christmas. Which is where Clara and the Doctor, this is the Capalby Doctor, they end up at an Antarctic station trying to help these scientists who are being attacked by these things called dream crabs, which are like these facehugger parasite kind of things. And they're fighting them, trying to help them. And then Santa Claus shows up out of nowhere and begins helping the Doctor. And it's really weird that Santa Claus appears to be just a thing. And they suddenly start to realize the reason they're seeing Santa Claus is because they are in a dream. And then they try to get out of that dream and realize they're still in a dream. So they're in this multi-level dream within a dream within a dream. And the tip that they keep using to figure out that they are in a dream is that Santa Claus is real in all the dreams. Then actually at the end, it becomes a little bit of a thing of wondering if they're still in a dream, that Santa Claus may or may not be real. But that's not really what makes this my favorite episode. The dream parasites are definitely what makes this horror. What makes this my favorite episode is the fact that Clara had just lost her boyfriend, who was a fantastic character. He ends up sacrificing himself. It's a really cool scene. We won't go into that, though. That's not really part of this. But he had sacrificed himself. Well, in her dream, after the doctor manages to defeat the dream crabs, he wakes everyone up. Clara won't wake up, even after he gets her to the point where she should. And you find out it's because of the dream she's in. She doesn't want to wake up from, because she's living this perfect life with her boyfriend, where the boyfriend is just this figment of her imagination. He's not real, but he's her ideal of what he was like. And so she's refusing to wake up because she doesn't want to leave the dream. The really cool part is that the boyfriend, as this is going on, turns to her and tells her it's a dream and she needs to wake up. And she doesn't understand that, if he's a figment of the dream, why is he telling her to wake up? Talking about, because even as a figment of your imagination, I love you, because that's the thing you know about me more than anything else, is that I love you and I want you to be safe. And her talking about that she can't live without him, that the grief is too horrible, that she can't stand to go back to this world where he isn't there. And he gives her this absolute fantastic speech that just hit me right in the heart, because it's this entire speech about, look, I know that you're sad and I know that you're grieving and I know that you miss me. So here's what I want you to do. Every single day, I want you for 5 minutes to grieve me, for 5 minutes. And I want you to be proper sad. I want my 5 minutes. But for every other minute of every other day, get the hell on with your life. Because even a shadow of him created by a monster loved her that much. Love that scene. Absolutely fantastic. Has a great Christmassy love theme to it. Can't talk enough about it, but I will go ahead and stop talking about it. And those are my 3 absolute favorite Christmassy horror Doctor Who episodes.
Yeah, and the more people talk about it, and the less I hear people talk about it regularly, the more I want to watch Doctor Who. But every time I try, I get back to that feeling of, guys, can we please talk about something else?
The flashback nerd out trauma is a very real hazard in our world.
And I feel like something was taken from me by this, because I feel like I would love Doctor Who. But once again, yeah, all the flashbacks.
What you need to do is you need to watch a Doctor Who episode and take 5 minutes out of that episode to be really resentful at the people who made it bad for you, and for the rest of the episode, just fucking enjoy it.
We'll give it a shot. Where can one stream Doctor Who?
I forget. I know it's streamable. I've streamed it a bunch.
It is on a
I think they've moved it recently. I'm not sure. We'll have to find it. But I know it can be streamed.
Disney.
Sure.
Oh, that's true. I think it may be on Disney now.
Disney owns everything now, don't they?
Which is bizarre.
And The Simpsons predicted it. But anyway, me having to check out Doctor Who aside, I think we covered a lot of really good, albeit snowy ground today.
Absolutely. I love Christmas horror because, as we covered in this episode, horror is horror and just darkness in general, I guess, is an intrinsic part of Christmas, both in all the media that covers Christmas and also in all the folklore that led up to it. And just the dark side of Christmas is so fun to explore. And it's why I was so excited to do this episode, and why I'm so glad you guys are going to be getting this episode on Christmas, because Christmas is often depicted as so saccharine sweet and jolly and just this kind of one-note, beneficial, wholesome kind of thing, that I hope we can interject a little bit of horror, a little bit of spice, a little bit of grittiness into your Christmas experience.
I would say we've done that. So much like this year, we're coming to the end of this episode, and we really hope you enjoyed it. I hope you all have a happy holiday. I don't care if you celebrate Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, non-denominational winter happy time, Crimbus.
If it's Festivus, the Festivus for the rest of us, whatever you may celebrate, we hope that you have a really good one, and we will see you again in the new year. So no matter what, I hope that you have yourselves a scary little Christmas, and this has been Liminal Radio.
That was Gray, and I'm Hatter, and thank you for joining us on the Stations Between Stations, where we explore the greatest of horror rabbit holes. All right, so this is Hatter coming in at the end. we were only 54 seconds under a full 2 hours for this episode, and I wanted to read us 2 hours, so here's a little bonus content. Things I find scary. Wasps, Jello. Jello's pretty horrifying. It's made of bones and it's fruity tasting. That just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't care for the way it moves. You know what else is pretty scary? The kazoo. I thought that solo would take up much more time, but we got about 10 seconds left. If you got to the end here, folks, have a happy holiday, no matter what holiday you celebrate, I meant. Whatever, I'm adding this at the end. It doesn't matter if I mess it up. Have a happy holiday, folks.